Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Boris Johnson has been in the headlines and the heat for his dreadful gaffe about the British Iranian prisoner Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, opining that she was training journalists in Iran rather than on holiday visiting her parents. His words, no matter his retraction, may result in an increase in her 5-year sentence in Evin prison. But what about Nazanin herself in all this? How do we know what she's going through just now? John Sweeney has been talking to other women who've been imprisoned by the Iranian regime.
So I last saw Nazanin when she travelled, which would have been March 2016, so what, 20 months ago now.
This man's wife is incarcerated inside one of the worst prisons on earth.
Hello, nice to meet you, finally in person.
This woman knows what it's like because she spent time there twice. You've been inside Evin prison, what was it like?
It was not easy to go there when you had done anything wrong. So I was put in solitary confinement for a few weeks. I was arrested twice, and both of the time I spent the whole time in solitary confinement.
So what was the hardest thing about being in solitary confinement?
The most difficult thing is you are left alone there for days, and for some prisoners for months, by yourself. So the most striking thing is how to spend the time.
Richard Ratcliffe's wife, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, was visiting her mum and dad in Iran with her little girl Gabriella when they were seized by Revolutionary Guards last year. She's serving 5 years for allegedly trying to topple the regime. Then, the clown prince of British politics put his foot in it.
When you look at what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing, it's just, you know, she was simply teaching people journalism, as I understand it.
The regime has leaped on Boris's mistake as proof of Nazanin's guilt.
Boris Johnson's unplanned admission that some Iranian journalists were taught by Nazanin was a gaffe that the UK government couldn't cover up.
Boris may be in trouble, but what's life like for Nazanin inside Evin prison? She's undergone solitary confinement. It's usually made worse by extreme sensory deprivation, known in Iran as white torture.
You are put in inside the cell, so you are given 2 blankets.
Shadi Sadra knows what that's like all too well.
And also there is a light here up to the roof, which is a very bright light. It's on for 24 hours. So there is, so you have to get used to sleep under the very, very bright light. And you have to remain silent all the time.
What was the longest time you spent inside the cell without talking to a human being?
10 days. I remember when my interrogator called me, he told me that it's been quite a long time that you had not been interrogated, isn't it? And I said, yes. And he said, that's why I'm now calling you, because I knew that your mental situation is not good. You would need someone to talk. And he was right.
Another Evin white torture veteran is the journalist Maziar Bahari. His memoir, Then They Came For Me, inspired Jon Stewart's film, Rosewater.
I'm not sure how much they want for Nazanin's release, but the Revolutionary Guards who are holding her, I am sure they want something in return. The worst kind of psychological torture for Nazanin is being away from her daughter, who is in the same city with her, but she cannot see her. And just imagine for a mother not to be able to see her young daughter. That must be intolerable.
Labour can't cry shame too loud. Jeremy Corbyn took £20,000 from Iran's state-controlled Press TV appearing on the channel after it forced Mazia Bahari to take part in a staged interview at Evin Prison. But, incredibly, after more than a year in the job, Britain's Foreign Secretary has yet to meet Richard Ratcliffe. Why hasn't he met you?
I mean, it's a good question. I think the Foreign Office has always tried to downplay Nazanin's case, and they've said behind closed doors that keeping it soft and quiet is the best way to resolve it. And we've always had this tension where I've said, listen, I think putting it out in the media, just, you know, this is an injustice. The clearer this is stated to the wide an audience as possible, in the end, that'll win out.
Boris Johnson could do well to remember that politics isn't just about who's in, who's out, who's going to climb the greasy pole. It's also about ordinary people who may find themselves in a dark place. And if you use the wrong words, then their lives may be crushed.
John Sweeney. Well, Boris Johnson's poor choice of words is just one problem that's emerged for the government this week. So here to discuss the turmoils of Theresa May, and let's not forget the Labour Party, I'm joined now by Tom Newton-Dunn, the political editor at The Sun, Polly Mackenzie, Nick Clegg's former advisor, and Stephen Bush, the New Statesman's special correspondent. Good evening to you all. First of all, let's begin with Bertie Ahern and the words of warning tonight on a hard border and that idea that there's just 1% who could make this very difficult. Is your hunch that, like Bertie Ahern, something will give in the next month on Ireland?
Well, I think this is possibly the worst crisis that could hit the Brexit talks. This is really between a rock and a hard place now. There's absolutely no way the British government could accede to some sort of two-state system between Northern Ireland and the rest of the country, and there's no way now Varadkar can go back on it. So something needs to give, and we're reporting tonight that the reason why Leo Varadkar is doing this is because he's under his own intense political threat from Sinn Féin. His coalition's weak in the door. New Irish elections could be coming around the corner any minute, and he'll lose a whole lot of seats to Sinn Féin, who will beat him up for surrendering to the Brits unless he goes hard.
Yeah, so he has to go hard in the sense that he does go hard, and he then, if the EU decides to push for this hard border, which he doesn't want, then we end up with a hard border in Northern Ireland. Is that ever going to happen?
Well, the trouble is that the government's policy aims can only be achieved with a hard border. As your film showed, if you leave the customs unit, you have to have a border check. And as Tom says, the fact that at some point there's going to be an election means it's never in Varadkar's interest to turn around to the British government and go...
But here we are, we're halfway through the Brexit negotiations, and in a way you could have predicted that this would have happened, because it was never, ever going to fly.
Well, people predicted before the referendum, and, you know, ever since the referendum, people have been explaining that it's just not possible to achieve what the government wants without either putting a hard border in the Irish Sea or between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that's basically politically unsustainable, especially when, remember, Theresa May is completely reliant on the DUP for her majority, and they obviously have a very fixed position. Well,
and presumably, of course, right at the very beginning, there was no sense, of course, in Theresa May's calling of an election that she was going to end up in a position where she was enthralled to the DUP.
No, but do you know, I don't think it's just quite about the DUP either. There's a strong majority, or there's, I would say, between 50, 60 Tory MPs who simply could not allow a two-state system, you know, an all-Ireland solution anyway. It's not all about the DUP. It's unconscionable for a British Prime Minister to half-cede Northern Ireland under the control of the
well, I mean,
but DEXU come up with all of these kind of slightly wacky ideas and alleging that somehow blockchain's going to fix the problem.
But ultimately, the success of peace in Northern Ireland was partially ceding the issue and parking the issue and allowing people in Northern Ireland to have an identity that could be as British as they liked, as Irish as they liked. And the second we voted to leave, that was torn up forever. And we have a problem where, exactly as Polly says, these effectively science fiction solutions have been coming out of DEXU.
So I want to come on to Theresa May's travails, but let's just look, and we've obviously had another issue tonight with allegations about Kelvin Hopkins. Is there a sense now at Westminster, and particularly for the younger generation, they are now prepared to speak out and actually have courage and are getting courage from other people?
Yes, I think particularly there's a kind of sense among the younger generation, because Bex Bailey so bravely spoke to the BBC about it, and people feel that now is the moment. Things might actually be changing. We've seen how it's changing in Hollywood, and then this is a moment when the opportunity to change the structures of Westminster to make it less exploitative can be seized.
And of course there's a particular problem for Theresa May, because we are awaiting the investigation into Damien Green, so that, which brings us on to the fragility of her hold on cabinet, if indeed she does have a hold over cabinet?
Well, no, she doesn't. She clearly doesn't. I think this week has proved that beyond all doubt. It's very easy for political hacks like us to try and draw grand, sweeping conclusions about, linking up big themes to what is a quite appalling run of bad luck Theresa May is having. But I think you can do it on this week, and it's quite simply a catastrophic collapse of authority. If you have a Prime Minister that nobody is scared of any longer, your boss, you really don't give two stuffs what she says anymore, you will go and do your own thing. You will go and freelance your foreign policy in Israel. You won't bother reading your brief before you go in front of a select committee like Boris Johnson did. And I think that the real horror for Downing Street now is how many more tank mines are left unexploded.
But it shows a complete disregard for the electorate. It is another form of the kind of Westminster arrogance, not to read your brief, not to care enough.
Yeah, I think it's extraordinary. And whilst there were criticisms last week that the bar was set too low, that people were resigning for sexual harassment that was just a hand on a knee, this week it feels like the bar has suddenly shot up. And Priti Patel, sort of day after day, more and more revelations have got worse and worse. And only after, I think, about 3 days did she finally do the honourable thing and resign.
In then repeating the Brexiteer in cabinet, sort of making like with like, there are lots of young people in the wings who want to come in, but at the moment she can't afford, in the middle of Brexit, to start moving too many chess pieces around.
I actually think she has more power than she thinks, because the one thing she has got going for her is the fear of Corbyn in the Conservative Party. She could, I think, have been more bold, but what the problem is, she knows there may be more accusations of sleaze out there. So if she does a big reshuffle...
And not only that, she knows that her new Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, may know about a lot more that are about to come from being Chief Whip.
So she makes a move now, and suddenly she has to move someone else, and it becomes like the letters behind her at that backdrop, and it's just a nightmare if she...
I think that's coming, though.
She's been captured by her own timidity, in a way, hasn't she?
But what's happened in the last week or two is the balance is now thrown away from timidity to, quite frankly, they've got nothing left to lose.
So let's just turn to Boris, because everybody's going. The endless stories about Boris's demise have gone on for so long. But that it was the complete disregard this week was not just a slip. It was, as you say, not even bothering to read the brief. Would Theresa May like to get rid of Boris if she could, or actually, is there a funny way in which you can contain him more inside than out?
He's better inside the tent still, because at the moment, although he's annoying in his brief, he can't suddenly start going, I think universal credit is bad. I've got opinions about the pace of the deficit.
Well, that's because we sort of have collective cabinet responsibility, but sort of.
Sort of. But sort of is a lot better if you're Theresa May than not at all. He doesn't have much of a following in the parliamentary party, so he couldn't upend the apple cart that way. But he would be someone who could suddenly start saying the kind of things that New Statesman readers would agree with, and that would make him more dangerous for her again.
But how is he regarded, do you think, in the party now? Is he still revered by party members?
I don't think he is. I think a lot of the shine has really come off Boris as that kind of great figure of fun, who might be the witty standard bearer for conservatism, and lots of the people who admired Boris for that now have kind of shifted to thinking of Jacob Rees-Mogg as that sort of have I got news for you friendly Tory.
And just before we leave this story, the Time Splash is about a Mrs. Hoodfire, who's Canadian, who was in Evian prison as well, I think, and she and her child were both hooded. Now, the more you get about this, the more you realise how dangerous Boris's words were.
Well, yes and no. I don't think this is going to get Boris, and I will happily put my hat on the table and be prepared to eat it when it's made of marzipan some later stage. Boris screwed up, no doubt about it. He may well have made things worse, but quite frankly, it is still the Iranians who are doing this. The Iranians who are hooding 3-year-old children when they go and meet their mother, who's also hooded. And I think, actually, as time elapses, people realise that they are using Boris's idiocy to make matters worse for their own pretty despicable ends.
Is he safe until there's a major reshuffle, or indeed
I think he's safe until Theresa May goes. But I think you can't have a foreign secretary whose idiocy makes it easier for the Iranians or indeed any nation to endanger British citizens. I mean, that is surely in the job description not to do that.
Very briefly, do you think come the new year, Theresa May will still be in position, Polly?
It all depends on the budget. Can she pull off a decent budget to give momentum back to the government? If not, then she'll go.
Stephen?
Yes, I think she will.
Budget and also getting a deal at the EU Council and Assembly. She's got to move on to trade talks, and then I think then she's got to do a reshuffle. She does all that by January the 10th, she'll live on.
Thank you all very much indeed.